Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. Today is Tuesday, June 11th already. I'm here with my second cup of coffee, and I'm excited today to have Rasool Berry on my podcast. Joining me for a second cup of coffee, we're going to be talking about the documentary he produced, wrote, and hosted called Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom. And I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to have. Rasool is also a podcaster. If you remember, I was on his podcast, Where You're From, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And that's still a podcast I share pretty frequently today out. It's a great way to introduce people to the work I do. I haven't known Rasool very long. We've met in more professional environments several times, but I've always enjoyed the conversations he and I have had. And I just watched this documentary, and I'm thrilled to be able to share that with you. And we'll put that out on the links today. But I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I invite you to grab your favorite morning beverage, pull up a chair, or sit on the floor somewhere comfortable where you can keep moving, and join me for the second cup of coffee. I want to start by acknowledging today I'm speaking to you from what's now Piscataway lands, Washington, as my people would call it. But these are traditionally the Washington, D.C. is traditionally the lands of the Piscataway, and I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I live. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbled I am to be living, breathing, moving on these lands today. So let me bring in Rasool, and we'll talk and get this conversation going. Rasool, Yá'át'ééh. Good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning, and I am coming to you from what we now know as Brooklyn, New York. And I did a search online to see we are in the land of the Muncie Lenape. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I did the best I could.
It's the Lenape, but yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Lenape. Thank you. Yes, so I am so glad to be able to join you. Always enjoy our opportunities to have conversation with each other, and yeah, to kind of share with you a little bit more about Juneteenth.
Yeah. So let's start. We'll get into the Juneteenth movie, our documentary, in just a moment. Let's start with where you and I met, which is when we
Yep.
were on your podcast, Where
Mm-hmm.
You're From,
Yep.
which I learned is a product of my daily bread, and then it's hosted
Christianity
on
Today.
Christianity Today. And I was looking through. You've been on. I think this is your fifth or sixth season now.
We just finished up our sixth season and are about to launch the seventh season in the fall. Yep.
Okay, so I love looking through your guest list of all the conversations you've had and the people you've had on there. You've had Sandra Van Opstal, you've had Jamar Tisby, you've had Renee Begay. I
Yep.
was obviously on your show. There's a lot of really good voices and people who are doing some great work out there that you've had a chance to talk to. One of the things I'd love to ask you is, which of those guests, I don't want to say made you the most nervous, but you felt like, I better be on top of my game, right? I
Yeah.
better be prepared for this conversation because they could go deep into something, or they could, it could go somewhere. And if I'm not on
Yeah.
top of it, I could be quickly get lost in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think about my first run at this. This was before the pandemic, and we were doing all the interviews in person. And my second interview ever was with Dr. A.R. Bernard, who pastors Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn. It's the largest church in New York City, about 30,000
Okay.
people. And he's a very distinguished, impressive person, right? Like he has this kind of regal nature about him. But just the process, like when we drive up to the church, I mean, there's an elaborate, you have security that are, just kind of policing the parking lot just to help manage the amount of people coming in and out. But then he has like personal security. So I had to like be escorted to a specific parking spot, then go sit down and wait for some person to bring me to his office, and then his office felt like I was about to meet the president or something. And and so and then of course he comes in, and then we do the interview, and that was just an intimidating situation. But I think preparation wise, I think of the Andy Crouch interview simply because he's one of my favorite authors, and I had to read like 3 books just to like get ready, you know what I mean? The stuff that I hadn't already read from him, just to kind of prepare myself to be able to reference things. Cause I try to be as thorough and thoughtful about, what the person's already
Yeah.
been thinking about as possible. So those are 2 that stand out to me.
So another question I want to ask you, and I've already told you beforehand, you're not allowed to pick my episode because I'm not trying to get any kind of accolade here, but I really just want to know, when you think of the Where You're From podcast,
Mhm.
and which is the episode that if you had to give one person an episode to listen to say this is the quintessential Where You're From podcast, this will give you a flavor of what the podcast's about, the dialogue, the way it went, the
Yeah.
response to it. What would be the one episode, the one interview that you felt like, yeah, that really hit the mark as far as what this podcast is all about?
I know you told me not to like I'm not I'm really not pandering, but when I think about your episode, I do think about it in that way for several reasons. One, I mean the title Where You're From, the whole concept of the story is that to get context about what somebody's thinking about and what they're producing in the world, we should go and understand their origin story, their backstory, right? And it comes out of this framework, out of the assumptions that sometimes we make in a very Western individualistic culture, which is that like all I need to know about somebody is who they are today versus where they've been, and even where I've been. That we want to upend that. We want to, kind of undermine some of the blind spots there. And when I think about the interplay of both you and your collaborator Sung Chan Ra, in 2 different ways, like him having a this immigrant story, and first of all being a model, like a child model, like wait, who knew Sung Chan Ra was a child model? Like that just changed everything. But to see how his relationship with his mother and his father and all of those things like led into his story of, and I think some of the sensitivity about how is this Korean man being so prophetic about racial injustice, that you don't normally put those things together. And I think in the same way, your story, both in terms of changing, I'll say this as a background, so I'm not paying. I promise y'all, I'm not pandering. The first time I ever heard you speak, it was at a conference in Minneapolis that Crew City was putting on,
I
and
remember that conference.
yeah, and I remember you talking about, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence being systemically racist documents, and I remember just kind of going through all the things I had learned about American history, which I enjoy history, was like upended, and it was riveting in that moment. And so I think there's something about how understanding our backgrounds gives shapes how we can see what someone does, that is so important to me, and that I really resonate with your work and unsettling truths. So a lot of what we try to do and implement with it, and then you add the faith component to it, you add the cultural social moment to it, the politics to it. And so yeah, I do think in a lot of ways the episode with you is quintessential. And I promise you, I'm not just saying that.
And I specifically told Rasool he was not allowed to choose.
You did, but I couldn't help it. And I'm on my first cup of tea, by the way. That's my second cup of coffee.
Okay, and yeah, I'm writing that book with Singchan was such a blessing. In fact, he was in DC yesterday, and he and I were able to hang out and had lunch, and we got a chance to spend some time together. So
Yeah.
we really enjoyed. He's become one of my closest friends, and it's been really good to have that relationship. Now, I want to kind of transition from that, and I'm going to ask you a question. And when I think back to that episode on Where You're From,
Hmm.
I remember the interview you and I had
Yep.
where I was being really straightforward and was kind of hitting hard on a lot of the topics I love to hit hard on.
Yep.
And then I remembered when I listened to the episode, I was like, wow, that's a lot softer than
Yes.
I remember the conversation going. And even the way you were responding to things. And I just like was like, that was a something. And I talked to my assistant, I talked to some other people. I said, what do we want to do? Because I knew it was going through a broader filter than just you, and
Right.
I knew there were some funders and people who were backing the podcast who had more hand in the editing than you did. And so I thought, do we say something, or do we just use this as a really good introduction piece for someone who doesn't know me and wants to learn about the work I'm doing, and use this as an introduction piece? And that's why we've decided to use it, which is why one of the reasons I really like the interview, but it because it's softer,
Right.
it's a great way to introduce people to my work without kind of hitting them full brunt with a
Right.
tidal wave of history and information. And so when I look at your work, whether it's on where you're from or whether it's in your work with Juneteenth, and I'm going to share the link for Juneteenth. It's on your Voices Experience Voices webpage. And this is the place. So there's, even just so people know, there's two versions of the movie out there, right? There's a 76-minute version, which is on YouTube. And then there's a 56-minute version, or 57-minute version, which is on the PBS website. I didn't know the YouTube version existed, so I watched the PBS version. I want to go back and watch the other version because I always love to talk with authors and with
Yep.
producers and people who, especially people who come from a more marginalized background or demographic, and who know the history, and they're working hard to get the truth out there. And a question I love to ask, because I know how hard this is in my work, is what did you have to edit out, right? Like, what did you
Yeah.
want to say that for whatever reason, it was funders, it
Mhm.
was audience, it was time, it was something else, people said, no, we can't bring that in here.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear, without kind of just making it a moaning session, but like, what are some of the things that when you hear when you watch the documentary, you're thrilled that got in, but then you're
Right.
like, oh, if only we could have gone there or spent more time or gone deeper into this topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I guess I'll kind of answer it in two ways. Like, one, I think it's a reminder of the reality of having to negotiate our identities and our cultural insights, in realizing that we are living in a, like you used the word marginalized, which I think is appropriate, or, in a contested space where, the narratives that we grew up understanding, or even that our own experiences have informed, oftentimes are contested and challenged in broader spaces, even by some of the co-collaborators that we, work with. And we all have to make decisions about, what is acceptable and tolerable versus what is like, okay, I can't, this now is compromising the character of what it is that
Yeah.
we're doing. And that's a space I've had to negotiate, since I've been, involved in ministry over the last, 24 years. And specifically with Juneteenth, that was, just for context, our Daily Bread Ministries, which produced this, they have an incredible media team that, that we were working together with to shoot it, to, fund it and put it out there, edit it. This was never something they'd never done anything like this, that took a story, a documentary about a historical issue relating to race and slavery, and told that story and through the lens of the contested versions of Christianity that were presented to either justify slavery by those of the enslavers in the culture, or to be empowered for liberation as embodied by the formerly enslaved folks. And so this was new territory, and in the context of that new territory, we recognize that there was a lot of nervousness, there was a lot of, trepidation. And so there were some things that were said that, we wrestled with, we went back and forth, we fought for, but in the context of wanting the fuller project to really be out there and folks to feel good about it, we settled on not including. And I'll give you a couple examples. So there's a moment where Pastor Michael Waters. He's a pastor out of Dallas, Texas. The director knew him. I did not know him. And
Yeah.
so all I knew was we were going to his house and that he had an activist background. And so we were going to just talk at this nice pastor's house about Juneteenth and his history with the holiday. Well, we get there and it is like a virtual museum. One of the things he does is he gathers artifacts to bring home the story of, racism in our country and slavery. So he has uh, shackles that he's presenting me with, um, police badges of, plantation police. He has the tags that a free black person would have to wear. He had a Klan robe. I mean, it was all these things that he had that he's just like hitting me with.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he brings out, now the part that made the film was when he pulls out the plantation badge, the plantation
I
police
remember that.
badge.
I remember that.
The part
Yeah.
that didn't make it was what he talks about, how that is the origin of policing in our country today. And making that relationship and making that connection. And so for some that was, a bit too provocative, for, certain audiences, and that was kind of something we had to kind of compromise and let go. There were some other moments that we contested and we were like, this has to stay in there, including the long montage about the KKK and the Birth of a Nation movie. There were some
Yeah.
that were uncomfortable with that, but we kind of made the case that in order for us to shine the light of the gospel and how important and liberative these passages really were, we have to show how distorted, how the distortions said something the opposite, and that made it in, that, those, arguments won the day, and so we were really proud of what we came up with. But yeah, there was definitely some of the what I call spicier content that, kind of was maybe left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. I remember it was early in the documentary, and I forget who you were talking with, but you basically said, before we can have a conversation about the freedom that was brought on Juneteenth, or that was at least proclaimed on Juneteenth, we have to talk about what people were being freed from.
Yeah.
And then you went into more of the history of slavery and things you saw and that you looked at in Texas, and in other parts of the South. And I like, for me, when I go back to some of the sites where massacres happened or where
Mhm.
my people were imprisoned, right?
Yeah.
You see things that are hard. You learn things that maybe you've heard about, but you didn't get the full brunt of them.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was a part of your learning curve in filming and producing this documentary? Like what hit you of like, I didn't understand the depth of that before, or that was even new information? Like what was it? And
Mhm.
when I was writing on Selling Truth, I had to take breaks several
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
especially when I was writing about the white supremacy and genocidal policies of Abraham Lincoln, to just say, okay, this is so changing the paradigm of how I understand history. I have to stop writing and just process for a moment, and several months actually, what
Mm.
I'm learning.
Yep.
Um, was there any moments like that in this documentary for you?
Yeah, there were a few. I mentioned there were several firsts in my life. I had never held slave shackles before, so Pastor Waters bringing me those was intense. I had never gone to a plantation before, and so going to a place, a sugar plantation in Texas, um, was very heavy, and there was a moment it didn't. I don't think you can capture it really well visually, but when we go to the slave quarters, and all that's left is just the ruins of almost an outline of a building, and it's a really small building, like it's basically the size of what we would maybe consider uh, a medium living room today, and to understand that there were multiple families living there, while I had just walked away from this elaborate, you know, uh, mansion that these enslaved people built for other people. The contrast of that was dizzying, and I think it brought to life the incredible exchange of wealth, the inequitable exploitation of labor, and how that has translated into the types of disparities that we see today. Because I didn't grow up in the South, I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. There's a little bit of a distance that you can see with that level of the exploitation of the history of slavery in our country. But being there and seeing it and having a historian walk me through what I was seeing, was, I think it did give a significant more amount of like weight to, this is why it's so important for us to acknowledge this. And I would say on the flip side, on the positive end, the awareness, like just talking to all the people that we talk to, and these, descendants of those who were emancipated on Juneteenth, and to see how important that history was for them, that they knew their great grandparents who were emancipated. They knew the outcome and of what that day meant for them in terms of the trajectory of their family and their lineage. That was incredibly empowering um, and inspiring. And I think specifically to see the way in which many people recognize and connected this story to their faith and why they worship. And I think the kind of that was more than what I bargained for when I came down there. I didn't know what I was going to see, but it was really both. So it was heavier than I anticipated, but it was also more inspiring than I
Yeah.
anticipated as well.
Yeah. I just people who follow me, part of my channel, and watch my episodes more regularly, know that I just returned a few months ago from a film festival in Phoenix, where a documentary I was a part of, Bad Indian Hiding Out in Antelope Canyon, premiered, and I was thrilled to be a part of making that documentary, being filmed in it, and being part of the premiere and the interview for it. But through that process, I'm learning about kind of the whole film festival circuit and how to promote documentaries, and it's not just an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
What's been your journey like? Like I've seen the Juneteenth documentary, Faith and Freedom, has been in several film festivals. It's on PBS.
Mhm.
You even have it released on YouTube. What's been your journey of how you've been trying to promote this, and what's your vision? Where would you like to see this film go?
Yeah, so this is the second documentary that I was very involved in with Our Daily Bread. The first one got kind of, and actually, it's a good tale of the fact that you never know what's going to happen. So the first one was called In Pursuit of Jesus, and we traveled around the world to interact with people from different cultures to understand how my view of Jesus could be expanded by listening and understanding how they saw Jesus, right? So we went to Sweden, Singapore, South Africa, Argentina, Israel, Palestine, right? Amazing experience, life-changing experience. So this thing is going to be big. We're going to have a premiere at the World Trade Center. I had an interview lined up on the Today Show with Al Roker. And then 2 days before the interview was going to be shot, one of his producing team got COVID, and just the entire world just stopped.
Yeah,
And this was like end of February 2020. And what was all of this hype and anticipation of something that was going to be major just got completely overwhelmed. I mean, you could still find it on YouTube, but the moment of global pandemic totally, understandably overwhelmed the storyline of what we were wanting to talk about. And whereas with this one, much different situation, shot toward the tail end of the pandemic, but shot in 6 days, very hastily. Like we only had 3 months to prepare, plan,
wow,
before we shot, 2.5 months to edit after that, and then it was like boom, put out there. Which, for those that don't understand, and I didn't fully understand how crazy what we did was until I started going to film festivals and realizing that people take 3 years on
yeah,
average to do a documentary. We did it in 3 months. So it was kind of wild. But in that, the response that has been there and the resonance with the story, with the message, with the way that we, look at the good, the bad, and the ugly as it related to the church, as it related to America, as it related to race in our country. Um, the response was more than I could have imagined. I didn't think that, you know, 2 years later, I'd still be, talking about and still be asked to come out and screen. I didn't anticipate PBS, would air it, over 300 times across the nation last year, and we're about at 150 last time I checked this time, and they add more airings every day. So I guess the point of that is you just never know
Yeah.
what's going to happen with the film and how it's going to pick up, and you just do the work and you try to, get the story out there. But I did learn in the context of that just how powerful film festival circuits can be, because there's this beautiful community of people who really love cinema, who love meaningful stories. There's a lot of documentaries that you see there. So I've been touched by other people's documentaries that I happened to see while I was there at a film festival
Yeah.
airing ours. And so I got a chance to go to Sundance this January, and it just gave me a greater love and appreciation for the visual storytelling that we call filmmaking, and how powerful of a medium that can be to helping get these stories out there that oftentimes are forgotten.
Well, Rasool, I really like the Juneteenth documentary.
Thanks.
I'm going to go back and watch the YouTube less edited version that has an extra 20 minutes on it, so I can see what wasn't included on the PBS version. But I'm so grateful for your work. I'm
Mm.
really grateful for your voice. I'm going to share that link one more time. As I'm sharing this link to
Yep.
your experiencevoices.org website,
Yep.
what are ways that people can help promote
Yep.
what you're doing and be a part of it? How can they host a screening of this? What else can they do?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, one of the things that's been cool is the multiple ways that we really created this to help people, invite people into this new holiday. We haven't had a new holiday in like 40 years. Like when MLK Day came on the scene. So and I don't know when or if we'll have another one. And so it's a really important big deal. And I think one of the things we wanted to normalize is learning about it. That, sometimes people can feel shame and embarrassment with not knowing much about Juneteenth. And so that was why, even in the context of the documentary, we had me on camera asking questions and learning to sort of model for people, like, this is a great opportunity to learn about something. You don't have to be an expert on it. In the same spirit of that, we wanted to build a bridge with this. One of the things that I appreciate about your work is that, history isn't just, about learning about the past, but it's about informing our understanding of the present so we can move forward and not repeat the mistakes of the past, but also build a brighter and a better future. And so part of the thing that we want to do is dispel the idea that this is only for Black people, or that this is only about, those who were, here in the country and either the descendants of enslavers or the enslaved. No, as Miss Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, who just got a Medal of Freedom award from the Biden administration last month, says that freedom is for everybody, and that none of us are free until all of us are. And so what we want to use this holiday for is to invite people into a story and into a concept to say, what can we learn about how freedom was resisted? Because contrary to what I was taught early on, freedom didn't come to Texas 2.5 years later because it just took a long time for somebody on a horse to get there. As as the one genealogist who I talked to said, the soldiers didn't come to inform, they came to enforce. And so what that tells me is that, like what Frederick Douglass said, without struggle there could be no progress. And so in the same way that there had to be struggle for enslaved people to be free in 1865, even though the Emancipation Proclamation had declared something, it, in the same way today, does not necessarily mean that because we have rights on paper, or that in theory that they actually manifest themselves. And so we want to invite people into community. And the way you can do that is host screenings. Like if you're trying to figure out what are you going to do this Juneteenth, you may have off, or the weekend before, you can go to that website, experiencevoices.org/Juneteenth. You can host a screening. What that means is instead of kind of gathering people and having to click on the YouTube link where there are the ads, right? You can, or if you don't have a great internet connection, you can actually sign up for a screening. We will send you the digital version of the video of the film so that you can have a nice stable connection, show it at your church. We ask that people, if they can, donate $100 for the licensing agreement, and we give you, social media. We give you discussion questions. There's a
Wow.
soundtrack, and actually right now this year we're actually promoting this cool vinyl that we created of the soundtrack. While supplies last, for those who sign up for a screening. It's a great album. Lecrae, 4-time Grammy award-winning artist, is on it, and many others. And so that's a way that we would just invite you to host a screening, host conversations, realize that this is an opportunity to talk about how we can learn from the past,
Yeah.
regardless of if that's a past that we personally are connected to from our ancestry, or one that we're not, but just by factor of us living in this country and living in this world.
Yeah. One of the quotes I love to use in my work was used by um, uh, why is the name slipping my mind now? But where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you
Mm,
want to build community, you have to start by creating common memory. And that quote centers so much of my work. And I think it centers a lot of what you're trying to do, both with your podcast as well as with the documentary you've worked on and the other things you're trying to do. It's not about shaming or canceling people. It's about, let's create this common memory so we can have a healthier community as we work to
yes.
move forward. So I'm going to share one more link here, or two more links. So for people who are watching, you know that once a month I try to have a guest who joins me on my Patreon for a more in-depth Q&A. And Rasool has agreed to join me on my Patreon. George Erasmus, thank you so much. I don't know why that name slipped my mind there. He's the one who used that when he was writing about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. But so in about 5 minutes, Rasool and I are going to jump over to the Zoom link on my Patreon, and we're going to do an in-depth Q&A. If you would like to join us there, if you're a member of the Ask Questions tier or above, you should already have access to that Zoom link. If you want to sign up to my Patreon and sign up at the Ask Questions tier or above, you will be able to access that link and join us for the Q&A, or even watch it later if you can't join it live. And my Patreon is actually one of the best ways to support the work I'm doing. I work very hard to keep my voice independent and unedited. And one of the ways I do that is by having my Patreon, where people can support the work I'm doing and be a part of the conversations I'm trying to have. And it's a great way to move the conversation forward. Rasool, one last question, and this is merely a way for you to kind of end this. I'm going to share the link to the podcast that I did on the Where You're From. If people want to see that, I encourage you, if you haven't heard that podcast before, you can listen to that. And if you look through his guest list and all the other people he's had conversations with. But what's something maybe I haven't asked you, or something what's on your mind? What are you passionate about? What are you working on next? What's something that you
Yeah.
would like to kind of close out, just saying to the people who have joined us for a second cup of coffee this morning?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I've watched this in the past. I've, enjoyed the beautiful scenery as you have gone to different places, and it's just been, and your work, like I said before, you were an immediate shortlist, one of the first people that I said we got to talk to on Where You're From. So I really appreciate it. Um, I think right now I'm excited. I actually just got these bookmarks yesterday. We have a book coming out in September called The Whole Man: 40 Spiritual Reflections from Black Men on the Head, Heart, Hands, and Soul. So we look at the issues of head, mental health; heart, relationships; hands, vocation; and soul, the spiritual yearnings and strivings. and want to normalize these conversations. There's a loneliness epidemic with men, and just in so many ways in our culture, men are being, are struggling, and so we wanted to create a resource to kind of normalize that inner world health, from mental health to emotional health to spiritual health. And you can pre-order the book right now. You go to experiencevoices.org/whole man. So same first part as Juneteenth, but instead of Juneteenth, put whole man, WHOLEMAN. It's for everybody. And we think that that'll be encouraging. It'll also have a video component. So I went back into the creating video space for this. So we have 4 episodes that will be available for free online that's a companion to the book. And that's September 3rd that drops. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, I will put that link into the notes after I post this video.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Rasool. I wanted to say hi to Mr. Phil Fox, who joined us this morning, George, who was on, Jan. You asked about why there's a wooden shoe behind me, because my mother is American of Dutch heritage. So my clan, Navajo, we identify by our mother's mother. So I am of the Tsinbake Dine'a, or the wooden shoe people. That was a great question. Oscar, great to have you here this morning. Thank you so much. Russell and Mary and Oladeji and other people who have been on today for joining this conversation with us. Rasool, it's so fun to talk to you. I appreciate your work, and I'm thrilled that you're going to join me on my Patreon right after this. I'm going to put that link one more time in the chat. But my relatives, thank you for joining me for a second cup of coffee. I hope that your day is filled with beauty, and that we may all learn how to walk in this beauty together. So, my relatives, and hakonet.